style. I saw her doing it.
What's this?
Ramsey sat in front of me and she had a meeting with her this morning, and yesterday her mother taught her how to cast on longtail. I want you to know, Penny said, Penny Grams had to meet for 3 hours trying to teach me how to do longtail. How is that? Oh, my mom was doing this yesterday.
And this is a trial.
She cast on about 10 stitches, then she'd take them off, then she cast on 10 again, and she took them off. But
Why
I
did
was
you
like,
take them
"Oh,
off?
practice pushing." She may not know how to knit yet.
Oh, she said practicing your stitches. Okay.
Yeah, it's very fine. Right. Yeah.
Let's see that one.
Oh, goodness. And, but then
In the
she
back.
lost her loop there, so she passed it to Daddy to make the knot. Daddy didn't understand that with longtail, you have to have a piece long. And he gave her this much, and you have to have another long tail. To work with. And so she gave her the asphalt and we did it over. Yeah. She showed it that it had to be long.
All right, let's get this party started. We got a long way to go and a short time to get there. Yes, these are my people. You know that song called
Eastbound.
Eastbound Down?
But do you remember what movie?
Yeah,
it made?
Smokey and the Bandit.
Do you remember the premise of Smokey and the Bandit?
Do I remember the premise of Smokey and the Bandit?
People nowadays are like, well, why are they trying to like?
We're trying to get beer to Florida.
Yeah, but what kind
No,
of?
was it Florida?
Yeah, it was Florida for a guy,
It was Florida.
daughter's wedding,
Yeah, that's Florida.
but it was
What kind of beer?
kind of beer, specific kind of beer.
Almost.
Truckload of Coors beer, and why was that a big deal?
Because you couldn't have.
You couldn't buy Coors east of the Mississippi. And so he was smuggling it across.
Well, it was,
Nowadays, people.
well, you
don't
couldn't,
understand that.
of course, like you couldn't have certain kinds of beer in Texas because it's the Anheuser-Busch state.
Yeah,
For example, in the East Coast, there's a beer called Yuengling,
yeah.
And-
Oldest brewery.
It just hates us.
and it's only 2 years young in the state of Texas, and because Anheuser-Busch gave permission, or they finally worked out a corporate deal, for that very silly reason. I could go on that, but I shall not. We got a long way to go and a short time to get there. Let us open in prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, for our time together, for the gift of discernment, for the gift of reflection, and for the gift of the Holy Spirit who continues to grow our hearts and grow us as disciples. In the name of Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen. We had 2 chapters. I'm just going to try and hit them on the very highest levels right now. We do have some folks who are with us today that have not been with us the last couple of weeks. So let's do some really quick introductions. Kitty is our only one who's with us online. And today, let's say this, your name and trying to think of something, like not your favorite color, it's not your favorite pet, not your
Biggest thing that got done last.
biggest thing you got done in the last week. My God.
I'm ready.
All right. Kitty, you're gonna say your name and the biggest thing you got done in the last week.
Kitty Kosachata.
Now I'm judging you on this.
I can't think of the biggest thing. I know I am preparing everything around here for my upcoming foot surgery.
That's a big thing. Preparation for foot surgery is a big thing. Good. All right, since you're the one who said it. Seaman.
Oh, my turn. John Seaman, and biggest thing that I got done last week was bought a house.
Oh, wow.
That's a big.
And where is it? Here in
San
San Antonio.
Antonio.
So that means you're.
No, I've been living there most of the time,
Oh, so
because we
we're
were renting from friends.
Oh, okay.
But we found a perfect house and ended up, well, we haven't bought it yet, but we got a signed contract.
Congratulations.
Now we have to finance and close.
Well, you win.
But we're waiting. I was waiting for Scotty not to be here to say
Well,
because,
this is recording live on
oh,
YouTube.
he's not watching.
I know.
Oh, Scotty doesn't know.
But and neither does Hillary's younger daughter Coco, because we're gonna close on their birthday.
Oh,
So,
and will they be happy? You think?
yes.
Okay.
Nothing's changed.
They
I mean,
won't
we're
change
just-
schools or.
No, because I mean, nothing changes except we're no longer renting a place from friends. We will then.
Fantastic.
All right, Carla.
Wow, I
Top
don't
that.
have anything. So Carla Young, biggest thing I did was pray really hard that my oldest child would not have to go from Virginia to Okinawa. And we got word that they're actually just gonna go to San Diego, so they're still in the US, as the rest of my children are everywhere else.
Right?
Yes.
What else would they be?
Yeah.
That's strange. that
Virginia.
prayer actually worked with
Oh, it worked.
Marine Corps assignments.
Right?
Normally they're like, oh, somebody's praying for you.
Our family is familiar with those. Virginia, San Diego, and Okinawa. Those are all places familiar with our family. Diane, you're up.
Mine would be that I managed to get up and arrive at church by 8 o'clock yesterday morning, so I could get on the van that Josh drove, a group of ladies to a women's Presbyterian retreat yesterday morning.
Fabulous. All right, let's come back over here. We'll start with the long-haired hippie dude.
Yeah. My name's Colton. The biggest thing I did this week was I learned my blood type. It's O positive and I wrote it down. Now I know.
Now it's at the battle.
That's
the biggest
thing just this week.
Yes, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like you need help setting goals for the week.
Wow. Way to lead off, huh? Top that.
Maybe, I'm Caitlin, I'm married to the guy that learned his blood type.
That's funny. I had a spit take, Mom, sorry.
The biggest thing I did this week. I don't want to say anything boring, but it's work related, it's mostly what I did. It was nice to sing at Wayne's service yesterday. It was fulfilling to serve in that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mercy.
Okay, my name is Mercy Ngoma. I can think of something you guys did this week other than, oh, maybe I can think of my sister is moving from California to Georgia. So I sent her some money for gas. So she's driving. Yeah, I didn't do it by myself. I had my two brothers chip in. So we sent us.
Congrats.
Emily Hobby, and I made time to look for something that I knew I thought it was somewhere, and I found it, and in finding it, I found some other things that I thought I had lost for years. Wow.
That is
science.
one of the most vague, wonderful things. One of the big things, I'm gonna lump it all together, but I had this conference, I gave two workshops at 90-minute workshops on Tuesday, and a funeral yesterday and worship today. So altogether, that was a lot of taxation on the brain in a very short period of time with a lot of travel. And so
Listen to six old ladies babble at you.
Yeah.
uh,
Bus driver.
that was a very good joy of my week. So better than the airplane ride for sure. So Look, all right, so you got the handouts, and as I've said to each week, you know, if you didn't read, it's okay. I still want you to come. We'll do some review, well, there's some review there of what we've done. And you know, our leadoff question today is, does a one-size communication about stewardship work at a church? Why or why not? Does a one-size-fits-all communication work at a church? Why or why not?
No, because the church isn't one size.
That's answering the question by reframing the question into a statement. So unpack it more.
I'd say for the reasons you talked about today, I mean, first of all, one size communication about anything within a church doesn't work. Because the congregation is not one size, people in it are one size, but especially about money. For all the reasons you said, how highly personal it is, and we've been conditioned, you know, how, you know, don't talk about money, you know, whatever, for whatever reason. So one size communication doesn't fit.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else?
I think there are aspects of communication about stewardship that can certainly apply to everyone. You know, as far as how it should be motivated, why we should be giving. That no matter your relationship with money or where you come from or your age or denominational background or what have you. If you're giving to the church as an organization, then your motivation should all be the same. And that can be communicated in one size.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. And I don't know if I don't know. Because I think because I wonder about that because of how many folks bring their own job description of what a pastor should be with them and project that on me, right? And so their own experience about what a stewardship program or communication about money looks like and what works well, they also bring too. But like, you know, I pick on Mike because he's really easy to pick on because he's not here. Although I would have said this if he was here, right? Like, I know one of the things that really communicates well with Mike is he and I both speak very well the love language of 15-page doc budgets. Like, that is something that like absolutely was an easy communication tool for us that would probably absolutely not be a tool for Carla. And that isn't a why, but it might resonate more with me than it would with you. And so I think there's that multifaceted aspect related to that, even though the leadership, the why, should all be grounded in the biblical, the theological. And that's what I feel like I hear you say,
Yes.
right?
Yes, I-
Right? The biblical, the theological, and that's where I think is where we get missed. And that's where I think the folks who come in from our various traditions, and let's just take a beat and figure that out real quick. Your lifelong Christian tradition within this room, right? What you would say is your primary denominational practice. For example, my lifelong denominational Christian practice has been Presbyterian. What has your lifelong generally denominational practice been?
For the most part.
For the most part,
Presbyterian.
John,
Presbyterian.
Carla,
Methodist,
Who's their background?
Presbyterian.
Caitlin.
Presbyterian.
Baptist, Methodist, sometimes I wish I was Franciscan monk.
Good. And Kitty, mostly Presbyterian.
Presbyterian.
And even within all of those Presbyterians, right, Illinois and West Texas, Malawi,
Not to
Northeast,
No, not to, well, Greek
Well,
was Northeast.
right,
But
but
I was a Presbyterian.
but you said Lutheran, right, and
Gulf Coast,
what's that?
Gulf Coast, Texas.
Right, Southeast Texas,
Indiana.
Indiana, so even in all of that, y'all impressed that I knew your regions? Because I am. But even in the midst of all of that, right, even in those churches, the idea and the concept of biblical and theological concepts of financial stewardship were varied based on region and within those traditions of what you brought to this church. And those get applied. So like me talking candidly and openly about money, of which I have zero problem with, being in a room full of 300 plus people earlier this week where, it felt like, for many of them, like, oh, I'm finally in a safe space where I can talk about money, because I can't talk about money in my church spaces because I will get, it's taboo. It's too difficult to talk about money spaces. How do I help build a culture where it's safe for us to talk about money because it's too taboo, it's too personal, or I'm going to get run out of town on the rails? And so when we think about all of those contexts, just in the church traditions, I think I mentioned last week, I consulted with a church 6 weeks ago who never preaches on financial stewardship ever. Did I mention that to y'all? No? All right. Yeah, never, ever, zero. The preacher never talks about money. And I was meeting with their council and I was talking about, oh, your pastor, preaching on financial stewardship, and the council members all turned to the preacher and had this sheepish look. I was like, no, I wasn't talking about Mike O'Brien. And the pastor had this sheepish look, and I was like, oh my God, I just stepped in it. And calling out what was happening in the room, I said, did I just step in it? And the pastor said, I never preach on money. I never talk about money. So long as I don't have to talk about money, I don't talk about it. And even when I have to, I don't. And I said, but you invited me here to consult on stewardship and to talk about money. And they want you to talk about money. Do you see them? They want you to, you're the people they've empowered you, who've hired you to lead them and to build them up as disciples, are asking you to talk about money. Well, I'm just not comfortable doing that. Right? That is so common in so many churches, or it's I will do it once a year. I consulted another church 3 weeks ago, very different church. The other one was a rural church. This is a corporate size, nearly 2,000 members. And they have one Sunday a year where they talk about money. Period.
Stewardship Sunday.
And that's today. Their one Sunday a year is today. And they don't know what to do with all their money. And I said, there's this lovely little church up north. They don't. They're running campaigns just to come up with imagination, creativity, creative ways to come up with money, because they're flesh, and they never talk about it. And I still think it's as much a malpractice, spiritual malpractice, to not talk about financial stewardship, even when you're plush, as it is to spiritual malpractice to not talk about finances when you are so far behind. Both of those, I think, are examples of poor church. And that rich church and poor church isn't just about the balance sheet. It's about the spirit and the theology of what's being about what's being taught and led within the congregation. So chapter 3 is where we were. And this is, I'm wondering if you all have been begun, as we're reading through this, if you've begun juxtaposing what's written in the book with what you received from our congregation and our literature and what's published. The Rich Church understands how to create compelling communication for its donors, always looking for commitments. The Poor Church bombards people with facts that generally move no one, always looking for contributions. A quote I put out here: compelling communication and the church connects the decision to give or the need to the Almighty. When people understand that the call is from God and that they are always being asked to be a part of God's work, they will commit. When they only feel that they are being asked to get numbers to a certain place or to make something a bit more attractive, they simply contribute. So what are examples of compelling communication that you've received or seen either from any institution? So what are ideas of compelling communication that you receive either from Hope Church or from other institutions that have solicited for a donation that, yes, that was really compelling, that really landed, and versus, you know what, they were looking for me to help them achieve the, you know, paying the light bills goal? What's been examples of fundraising solicitation that has been compelling, that inspired you to support the mission?
Well, we received a nice letter of gratitude this week from our own stewardship commission about faithful giving. And I appreciated that. And I've really noticed since this class started, the communications that I get from other from charities and institutions, focusing on the story of their work, what they're doing. We give to our son and daughter-in-law volunteer at a food bank type service in San Francisco, and we donate to that in their honor. And the story was all about the difference that the food bank made in the life of a woman whose life has taken a downturn, and she used to support the food bank herself in a small way. So, I mean, the things, how your mission matters in everyday life. I'm noticing that. I think that's an important story to tell.
Yeah, some sort of, you know, for you, an example of how a life was transformed, and in that regard. What else? Where have you had a solicitation for support that really had an impact for you? Please.
I think it was several years ago, but when we started the Hope Debt Reduction Program, I felt like that was compelling to get that extra amount so that we reduce.
So she was saying through our debt reduction, we had a one point at the time, it was like $1.4 million in debt. This was 5 years ago, and we generated a lot of buzz to raise funds and pledges to reduce the debt, to expedite paying it off, thus becoming a debt-free church at the beginning of this calendar year. And part of I think was the success of that was that wasn't and that kind of goes into this next part: God led, God taught versus numbers and percentages. God led and God taught. Part of that communication strategy was that there wasn't a group of 6 to 8 key people who led that initiative. The team of people who led that debt reduction program was 55 people.
Yeah.
There were 55 members of the church who were a part of that team. And they all had different subcommittees. There was a lead team, and Mike and one other person were on a team that was called the Big Gifts. And that was just a small team, and they went and identified and visited with some folks for some lead gifts. There was a team of 10 folks who was simply a prayer team. and they just focused on prayer. There was a communications team. There was a hospitality team. There was a blah, blah, blah team. This was broken up where everybody within the community, this 55-person team, had buy-in to the program, and the Spirit was at work amidst all of them. And instead of just, 6 or 8 people getting up and saying, well, here's our goals, this is what we're trying to do, and give us your money. And so the results were, I think, significant, because I believe it was spiritually led, faith-based, and the focus was on the support of the mission of this congregation versus, woe is us. Good. I'm going to switch on over to chapter 4, just in the interest of time, which is on page 4, principal not payments. And for many within this room, this might, reading this chapter might have resonated a whole lot more for those of you who were here, either when this church took the debt to either A, build the sanctuary, or took the debt to build this building, and the building of this building was particularly a fun story, or to refinance 10 years ago, the summer of 2013, to refinance this building, or Mike, was it 5 years ago? Was it 4 years ago or 5 years ago when we re-amortized was it 4 years ago when we re-amortized, or was it 5 years ago when we re-amortized the loan? Was it right at 5?
I think it was 3 or 4.
Yeah, so it was probably about 4 years ago. So we refinanced the loan at 10 years ago, and 4 years ago we re-amortized the loan, even as we were doing the debt reduction program. The 10 years ago, when I was leading the class and reading this chapter, it struck hard, because it was as if the case study was they wrote the chapter after studying our church, and reading this chapter and looking at their numbers was a huge gulp. And I remember leading that Sunday 10 years ago, that class on this 10 years ago, and it felt a little awkward in the room, because some of the principles that we talked about in contrasting a rich church concept versus a poor church concept was a lot of tethered baggage that came along with the conflict and the decision-making of building this building. 1 story or 2 story, 1 story with a gym, or 2 story with a gym, 2 stories, no gym, 2 stories with a gym, 2 stories, unfinished 2nd story, unfinished gym, or just 1 story, how much, and the conflicts of that, and how much do we raise, and well, we didn't really get the raise that we want, so how much should we, let's go big, let's go home, let's go big, and if we build it, that will come. And there was a certain projection of what we were going to grow, and it didn't grow, and then there was the recession, and there was a downturn, and there was, in fact, a membership record clerical error to the tune of 200 to 300 on, which obviously made an impact on the loan size that we took on, and and it made it very complicated. And these were things that we had to process through those first 10 years, the first 5 years that I was here, which made it complicated. But then as we began to go through it, at the debt reduction program, began, a course of, acknowledging it and forgiving it, and reconciling through those and moving on, extending grace. And I think the concept of this chapter is one of my favorite parts of in thinking about financial stewardship, I think it's in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus is talking about building a tower. For what man doesn't sit down and what man doesn't sit down and or begin to build a tower lest he gets halfway up, sit down and build a tower without first setting out and making blueprints, lest he get halfway up and run out of money and then look like a fool to everybody else. And the idea is not only sit down and make out the blueprints, but figure out what you can do. Lest you get halfway up and realize that you don't have the resources to do it all. And to be sensible and to be mindful and to realize what you can and cannot do. And realize that that is okay. And that the principle of if you build it, they will come is not a principle that is biblically based. Now, that being said, there absolutely are exceptions to that. Dripping Springs Presbyterian Church is a great example of an exception to that. They had a capital campaign, they built a worship center, they had a great celebration on an Easter Sunday of opening their worship center, and on Easter Sunday, it wasn't big enough. And it was never big enough.
Wow.
And they immediately had to go into another capital campaign to build another worship center. And so they have 3 worship centers on their property. Why? Because they just grew that big, that quick. And they just had to keep adding services basically until that 3rd one was built. You know, yes, of course, there are exceptions to that. Another one that's pretty close and resonates home, that is within the last 5 years. Just gonna not name names of a particular church that's 2 blocks from us that had a particular worship center and built another one and took on a very expensive loan and isn't fully able to afford it and is going to have a difficult time paying for it in the years ahead because of circumstances. But they built a very big sanctuary, and it's going to be very difficult for them going forward. And but if you build it, they'll come. And I think this is a particular concept that is not biblically based or theologically based. And this is the difference between rich church thinking and poor church thinking. Does that make sense? Yeah, I am. Good.
When we were doing our building, though, didn't we at this church kind of have that ideology that if we build it, they'll come? Or am I incorrect about that?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, and not the entire congregation participated in the funding of that campaign. It was the type of campaign that was done. But I was thinking about reflecting on that as I read the chapter. With the hope of building this particular facility we were sitting in, there was also the hope and promise of expanding ministry. And we did do some things that I thought about, what were we able to do? Well, for a long time, we supported IHN. We were able to house families here, let them shower, do their laundry, feed them. And that was something good that came out of if we built it, it will come. It wasn't the main, I don't think that's what one group had in mind, but that was a good thing. We expanded our vacation Bible school program because we had a bigger place and could take in more community children, not just children from our church. I'd be curious to know about Dripping Springs. I'll look them up. What other kind of programs were they offering besides worship space that brought people to that church?
Well, and opinions on that are beyond our time frame.
Yeah.
However, I think the concept and sticking within the parameters of the meat of what we're talking about, there absolutely was then and is now and continues to be opportunities for an expansive ministry that ebbs and flows like Ecclesiastes chapter 3. To everything there is a season. And the Interfaith Hospitality Network, so there was a season in which we did it, and to that season comes to an end. There was a season in which Our vacation Bible school was robust with 250 kids, and then that season came to an end. And these things, mission comes and goes. I mean, the ebb and flow, and that happens. And I think with regard to the meat of the chapter, the idea is, how do we as a community take on the financial responsibility of sustaining the property and also sustain the possibility of expanding ministries and financially of taking on ministries, while also financially supporting the payment of those properties, so that we don't and he uses this example where they had gotten themselves to a point, and we were that way too, where we not only had our personnel debt, we had this massive building debt, and we had a very difficult time funding our own in-house mission, as well as funding any kind of benevolence outward. Our youth ministry budget my first year here was $400. That's how much money we had for youth ministry budget the first year I was here. And children's ministry was around that same amount, somewhere around that same amount. A number of years we haven't had money for a children's ministry budget. It's still one of the smallest line items in our programmatic ministry budget. But a lot of that has been related to the significant size of, and I think that grid that he has in the book there about the loan payment being 33%, and that grid that he had in the book versus the loan payment being, what was it, like 10%, makes a huge difference. So 4 years ago, when we re-amortized the loan, that was an immediate relief that enabled us to just be able to sustain a budget without having to have additional massive cuts to our programs, to our benevolences, as well as to our staff. But in 2015, in 2013, we had refinanced the debt from $260,000 a year to $190,000 a year. And 13, a year and a half later, let's see, it was 13, 14. Yeah, a year and a half later, right? Yeah, 13, 14, yeah, a year and a half later, we had to lay off 2 persons for financial reasons. So we were still struggling with regard to finances and sustaining budget. So, and I think that's the concept of what makes these things challenging. It's the and I hold myself accountable, but I felt challenged by reading this. Is I could see myself being so excited. I could see myself being the one said, build it all, baby. We'll figure it out down the road. Build it all. Upstairs, downstairs, build the gym. Heck, throw in a new playground, build it all. We'll figure it out. And my enthusiasm, I could see it. But at the same time, I felt this chapter holding myself accountable and challenging me, saying, but be sensible. You know, don't be short-sighted, because the folks who are here today, they can feed on your enthusiasm. And the example that he gave is that they had 3 pastors in 6 years, right? The folks who are here today may not be the people who are here 3 years from today. That enthusiasm changes, that leadership changes, and it may very well be the folks who are your excited, enthusiastic, benevolent givers of your community move away, either to heaven or Arkansas. And with them may be their enthusiastic giving, and that changes things. Does that make sense? Anybody want to add any reflections on chapter 3 or 4, or excuse me, from worship today? Mike, you sent an email earlier to me. I think it was an email about our personnel line item. And in the book, he said something about 55% for personnel. And our personnel line item, I think, is not 55%. What was ours at, Mike? 65?
73, 73. But it's hard to tell what the author meant. I mean, you know, in his statistic.
Yeah, I think, and so you asked me about that, and there's a couple of things I would ask, and I would love to have asked Cliff Christopher what his thoughts on that are. My initial thoughts on that are, first, it's 10 years old. So I think the state and nature of giving is wildly different than it is 10 years ago. Size of church budgets are different 10 years later, as well as the way and approaches in which we do ministry and do mission and ministry is also very different. The ways in which churches support and benevolences is also different. So my guess is that that's probably a little where we are is probably a little closer than probably a lot of churches, except for as you get larger. So the larger churches get, I imagine that number gets smaller. The size of the personnel probably gets smaller the larger the church gets. That would be my guesstimate. I did collect, I mentioned to you, Emily, a couple of weeks ago about a statistical document called Blackbaud. I researched that this week. They have suspended preparing that report after 2022. But I found a new resource this week, and so I'm vetting it right now. And I should have that available to you.
In that same section where he mentioned the 55% for that, he also says that a number of denominations, the denomination requests each year amounts to between 10 and 15% of the budget. I'm not on session anymore, and I don't read. Sorry, Mike, I don't read the financial history here. It's not my bailiwick. What?
We're nowhere near that.
What's the denomination expect? Because I mean, that's one of the important things I learned from me, you know, about the cleansing of the rolls for that.
Yeah. I can't remember what the per person per capita is, Mike, but it is nowhere near that.
Yeah,
So
it's,
what is it, Mike?
it's $3,600 a year for everybody. And back when the Catholic Diocese of Austin was a client of mine and doing their audit, you know, the diocese got 8% from every parish off the top. So
They go off the top, and,
Yeah.
and PCUSA charges a per, assesses a per person. So ours is probably around, $10.25 per person, $10.25 per person.
That was a big deal decision when the church was voting to stop being a tri-union church when we left the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, because they were losing money when we left, because we were a big church,
Right.
Cumberland Presbyterian Church compared to most Cumberland Presbyterian. I remember that
Right.
was a big discussion.
Right. Any other thoughts anybody wants to share? I'm sorry to have blazed through to today.
I was gonna throw something out to you, Josh. And this is back to chapter 2, we're talking, but we're talking about conversations about money, which was generally, the giving end of the money or getting people to give, or we didn't want to talk about that. And then there's several questions in that chapter about, well, how much time is spent in meetings talking about money? And this gets back to what you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, is once we get the pledge number, we get the pledge season done, we don't have a lot of conversations about, okay, how should we spend it now? I've been on the stewardship now for 5 years, and it's pretty much, well, last year we had this much, but we don't really take a look and say, okay, do we need to change anything? We don't do enough of that. So there's conversations about and we have this pledge season, but when we get the pot of money, how are we gonna spend it? How should we spend it? Should we make changes that we haven't thought about? So to me, there's two conversation points. One of them we do a lot about, but the second point, when we get to stewardship meeting, we have been defaulting to what was last year's amount and add to it versus should any of this really change?
Yeah. And I'm gonna come back to you, Emily. I think one of the things that I thought about this week was not in the fall, but maybe at some point, late spring, early summer, is the importance of the leadership going through the responsible effort of building budget from scratch and just starting with zero and building from scratch, building, and by doing that, saying, what do we think that we want to do from August through next July? Okay, these are all the things that we think we want to do. These are all the things that we think it's going to cost. And let's not assume because this is how much we spent last year, we can just roll it over. We're going to have to do some research, roll up our cuffs of our sleeves and take some real research and figure out how much do we think we are going to legitimately spend on art supplies, or how much do we think we're going to need for, weed whacker spool for lawn care, et cetera. And see if that doesn't also give us an idea of building a relationship more intimately with projected expenses. Emily.
Well, one thing I took away is the Reach Church structures itself so that every 3 years it can explore the best options for ministry. And I was reflecting on that from a G to G standpoint. And I think that's something our committee has failed to do and needs to do. And that's something I want to take back to the committee, that you can't just keep doing things the way you've been doing them, because look where it landed you.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also good for not financial side. That's great. That's just great leadership. Let's just not assume that we are widgets and we can just keep doing what's the expression? Stupidity is just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? So it is great to go through the process of debriefing all the time. What worked, what didn't work, where could we do better, what could be tweaked, how do we listen to the people sing, and where are we meeting the needs, where are we not meeting the needs, what are the needs, what's cool and hip these days? Is it wearing Texas flag, button down shirts with long hair? Because if that's cool and hip, then Colton's our guy. So, all right, we all need to go away and
It is
and-
cool. Just.
what, Mike? You're gonna close us in prayer?
No, I was gonna close you with a thought, okay? A thought. Because this kind of crossed my brain, is that really what we look at is only a piece of what our congregation and our people do. We need to add HCC, G to G, and what the Hope Presbyterian Church together to show everybody what is the total context, of our mission and ministry.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that was a learning curve for me at the beginning of my time here as well, because that was reflected on one of the 15-page reports that I often ignored and didn't pay attention to at the beginning, because I was like, well, this doesn't really pertain to me. It doesn't pertain to the work that I'm doing here. When really, you're right, it does. It's taking a look at the whole. So, and thanks for agreeing to close us in prayer, Mike.
Okay, all right, well, I'll just pray that this lesson series we're going through is going to make a difference in each of our attitudes and approaches on how we give, how we spend, and how we communicate our gifts and our mission to others. And we need to do a lot of work, so I just ask Jesus to help us along and make us better at doing this so that we can fulfill the obligations we have as Christians to others out in our community. Amen.
Amen. Nailed it. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kitty. All right. Bye, buen dios, everybody.
You know, when we built